Make the climate great again. U.S. President Joe Biden urges 40 world leaders to commit to cutting emissions. So, can he restore America's credibility on the climate crisis? And will the summit lead to action? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. America is back to lead the fight against climate change. That's the Earth Day message from U.S. President Joe Biden. He hopes to restore America's global credibility after his predecessor, Donald Trump, spent the last 4 years denying the devastating effects of a warming planet. Biden is hosting a two-day virtual summit with 40 of the world's biggest polluters. China is promising to be carbon neutral by 2060, while Biden pledged to halve U.S. emissions by 2030 based on 2005 levels. He wants other nations to make equally steep cuts.
The truth is, America represents less than 15% of the world's emissions. No nation can solve this crisis on our own, as I know you all fully understand. All of us, and particularly those of us who represent the world's largest economies, we have to step up. You know, those that do take action and make bold investments in their people and clean energy future will win the good jobs of tomorrow and make their economies more resilient and more competitive.
Nick Clark explains what's at stake.
This virtual summit is the U.S. administration saying we're back in the fight after 4 years of Donald Trump ignoring the climate crisis. 40 world leaders have been invited, including those nations responsible for 80% of global emissions. And as you can see, top of that list is China and then the United States itself, the two world's biggest polluters. And together, they account for nearly half of the world's emissions. And that's why Joe Biden's special envoy for climate change, John Kerry, was recently in China, seeking and apparently getting a commitment to cooperate from Chinese leaders. But he knows much more is required.
A moment ago, no one nation can make the difference here. If China went to zero tomorrow, we still have a problem unless the other nations are also reducing. But the point of the Paris Agreement was everybody accepted the goal.
So the summit's aim is to galvanize nations, urging much greater ambition ahead of a crucial UN climate conference in Glasgow in November, to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Remember, right now, we're already at 1.2 degrees Celsius, and the effects of even that have been catastrophic, from ice melt to wildfires to droughts and to floods to locust swarms and superstorms, costing billions, displacing millions. Up until this week, national commitments to cut CO2 have pointed to a reduction in global emissions of just 1% by 2030. The experts say we need a reduction of at least 40% by that time. The world is banking once again on US leadership.
Here's what some other nations committed to this week before the summit. The UK is aiming to slash carbon emissions by 78% before 2035. The European Union passed a new law for a 55% reduction by the end of the decade. Some scientists argue these targets may not be enough. The UN's World Meteorological Organization says last year was the hottest on record. All right, let's bring in our guests. In Exeter, New Hampshire in the U.S., Michael Dorsey, co-founder of the Sunrise Movement and former EPA National Advisory Committee member. In Cape Town, Sanusha Naidu, senior research associate at the Institute for Global Dialogue. And in New Delhi, Chandra Bhushan, CEO of iFOREST, the International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology. A warm welcome to you all. Michael, let me start with you today. U.S. President Joe Biden is trying to reassert America's climate leadership with this summit. Considering how Donald Trump had pulled out of the Paris Agreement, how much of a credibility gap does the U.S. have right now on this issue?
Look, the president has indeed reinserted the U.S. into the multilateral climate context and negotiations going forward. I think really it's not an issue of credibility. It's an issue of delivering at scale and being really fast moving. That's something that I think we can expect from an administration that's trying to center climate and environment across all agencies at the U.S. administration level. But we've got to accelerate the commitment to increasing our reduction in emissions is going to be something that we've got to push forward. We've got to hold this administration accountable to deliver on that. We've got to do it also in a way that pays respect to environmental justice and moves resources to those on the margins of society, those that we know have been harmed and are being harmed first and most by the unfolding climate crisis.
Sanusha, the U.S. and China are at loggerheads when it comes to so many issues. I mean, there is so much diplomatic tension between both countries right now. And it wasn't clear until almost last minute if President Xi Jinping was actually going to be participating in this Earth Day summit. How important is it that both the U.S. and China are going to be involved?
Good day, Mohammed, and to my fellow panelists. I think it's very important, both for optics in terms of understanding that this issue is a non-negotiable issue. I think, as we noted in the insert, that no one country, as President Biden had indicated, can go at it alone. So I think both for President Biden and for President Xi Jinping, it is not just about a photo op, but it's about the fact that both have recognized how important this issue is in going forward. And the fact of the matter is that time has been lost, and the time that has been lost in terms of delivery, in terms of implementation of action, and going forward on deliberating and mitigating the risks around climate change and adaptation strategies has actually cost us a lot. So I think in that context, it's very important in terms of recognizing that climate change represents more than just about two countries coming together, but it's about the global governance arena, the multilateralism. It's about action in terms of going forward. But of course, this does not suggest that all the other issues that have underpinned their relationship, the tensions, the conflict, the undercurrents around issues around human rights, the trade and questions around security in the Asia Pacific go away. So this is one side of the mirror, but the other side of the mirror still remains.
Chandra, from your vantage point, I mean, let me ask you a version of the same question. How essential is it right now that the world's two top polluters, China and U.S., remain on the same page when it comes to combating climate change going forward?
Very important, Mohammed. I think we are talking about solving 50% of climate mitigation challenge if U.S. and China comes together, both in terms of current emission and historical emission. So it is very important that U.S. is ambitious, and I'm very happy that U.S. has announced 50% cuts in emissions. And China has to be more ambitious than what it has announced so far. China is talking about a net zero of 2060, but I think 2060 is the year right now because of the current technology that is available. And I think that can be enhanced significantly. The ambitions can be increased significantly with more technology and efficient technology, renewable technology coming into the market. So it is very important for US, China. In fact, it is important for G20, which accounts for 80% of the global pollution, to come together and address this issue. I just want to add another point, Mohammed, that for US, it is not only action, but also credibility is important. In 30 years of UN climate change negotiation, US has walked away twice. The Kyoto Protocol, as well as from the Paris Agreement during Trump's administration. And Biden will have to convince the world that it doesn't happen again. And therefore, whatever US commits will have to be enshrined in the domestic law so that the next president doesn't walk away. So I think it's a question of delivery, action, but also very important is the factor of credibility. US, despite last few months of Biden administration, there is a credibility gap as far as climate change is concerned regarding US.
Michael, it was just earlier this week that a UN report said that 2020 was one of the 3 hottest years on record. And then UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that we're on the verge of the abyss. I mean, this warning could not be more stark, but it seems like we keep hearing more dire warnings all the time from officials around the world, and that nothing really substantially changes. Is it realistic to imagine that things could actually change now, that action could be taken?
Well, look, it's important to understand the extent of the unfolding climate crisis. And so we can't mince words, and we've got to be really honest, it is indeed a climate crisis. So I think it's important to understand those things from Secretary General of the UN and so forth. The reality is that many things are changing and have changed. Just last year, the last quarter of last year, we crossed a new threshold in humanity that perhaps many of your viewers and listeners didn't notice. We came into a world where the cheapest way to generate electricity was with and will be with renewables. And that's going to stay the case going forward. That's a huge, huge change in how we can produce and deliver energy. And that speaks to our ability to deliver on that 50% commitment, which we know, I think it's fair to say, when governments announce a commitment, we can say it's a conservative commitment. So while it is important that the President of the United States, President Biden, made this commitment to increase reductions to 50%, we can actually do much, much more than that because we have the tools, we don't need new technology, and we can deliver that clean, green future and combat the unfolding climate crisis with renewable energy, as well as move resources, money in particular, to those in the global south, to those in marginalized communities in the north. So lots of things indeed are changing and will continue to change.
Sanusha, are we at a stage now where wealthier countries are actually willing to commit to help poorer and less developed countries adapt to climate change?
It's a difficult thing to say, but I think we've got to be, if we want to be as honest as we want to, I think with climate change, there's been this idea that countries need to show what kind of commitment they're going to do at the domestic level. And of course, the whole question of development finance towards renewable energy, towards climate adaptation and mitigation strategies have to come with some kind of geostrategic tag to it. I can't help but explore and try and be more honest about the fact that at the summit that we are looking at over the next 2 days, I'm more interested as well in terms of what kind of implicit conditionalities may accompany some of this financing for climate change adaptation strategies and the kind of commercial deals that then accompany this, where it opens up the markets in African countries and developing countries which are more vulnerable and don't have the resources around renewable energy and so forth, to then become susceptible to companies that come in and start taking control of their energy sources. And I think this is where some of the debates around the issue of climate crisis and financing for development around climate mitigation strategies and adaptation has to be had, because we know that the whole question of overseas development assistance has been shifting in a negative trend. We know that all of the countries have not reached their 0.7% of GNP, but this now means that we are opening up another avenue in terms of not just about what does this mean for the wealthy countries, but what does it mean for poorer countries where they are sitting with incredible impacts and vulnerability because there are companies that have exploited their natural resources and so forth. And I think at this point in time, I just want to add another point here, Mohammed, and that is the amount of money that leaves Africa in illicit financial flows. I think if that money is plugged and if the G20 is really serious about it, then that money we don't need the rich countries to support the financing for development for climate change in Africa or support the mitigation strategies. We have the money as a net exporter of capital.
Chandra, it often feels like developing countries are largely kept out of the main conversation when it comes to climate change. Are developed and developing countries starting to work together more?
It's early days right now. The discourse at UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, has not been easy between developed and developing countries. And in fact, I think it has gone worst over the last 3 decades, with a lot of distrust, shifting of goalposts, broken promises in terms of finance and technology. So I don't think that we are, in few months, we have achieved the goal of working together. I think it's a good beginning, but it will require a lot of trust building and cooperation between countries on climate issues, between developed and developing countries. Mohammed, I want to add here on the issue of finance. I think developing countries don't need the kind of finance that people are talking about, as my previous panelists very clearly explained in terms of Africa, but also in terms of Asia. The fact is that you need a wholesale reform in global financial system. Today, the fact is that the more vulnerable you are, you pay the maximum for global capital because the interest rate is very high. So a country like Bangladesh, if it wants to access global capital, has to actually pay maybe 4 to 5 times more interest rate than a Denmark or a Sweden. So I don't think developing countries are looking for a lot of public money on mitigations from developed countries. They are looking for technology access, and they are looking for much more reform in global financial systems so that they can get technology, they can have money at a competitive rate to utilize those technologies. However, money will be required in terms of building resilience, and if there are loss and damages, because climate change has started devastating parts of developed countries where money will be required to rebuild those communities. And I think global cooperation will be required in those areas.
Michael, I see you nodding along to a lot of what Chandra was just talking about. Did you want to also add your thoughts to what he was saying?
Absolutely. I think really the big crux going forward, I think it actually is going to hinge on, moving resources to the global south, but it's going to hinge on putting those resources into renewable energy, green infrastructure, things that are going to help us get out of this unfolding climate crisis. The fact is that China has been pushing through its Belt and Road Initiative and through other initiatives to push fossil fuel infrastructure around the world to meet its own particular needs. There's an opportunity not just for the United States, not just for the EU, certainly within Africa, within Asia, to push back on that commitment, that religious commitment to the fossil foolishness of the 20th century, and really lean in and put money in behind new technologies, renewable energy technologies, green technologies that are going to accelerate getting us out of this problem of the unfolding climate crisis. So that's where we've really got to focus.
Sanusha, since we're talking more specifically about challenges in particular countries and regions, let me just zoom in for a moment about when it comes to South Africa. I mean, what's the situation like there, and is it ready for a green revolution?
I think theoretically we talk about it a lot in policy circles, the government, the president. I mean, he's one of the 5 African country presidents that have been invited to the summit by President Biden. But the problem we have, or the challenge we have, is that we're still relying on very, very energy polluting coal as a big driver of our energy supply. And we have serious governance crisis and other crises within the state-owned entity that supplies electricity, which is called Eskom. We have challenges around this in terms of moving away from coal to more renewable energy, etc. We also have this whole debate happening and the challenge happening around kind of moving away from the reliance on one single energy producer to now opening up the market to independent power producers. I think on this issue, we don't have the kind of infrastructure going forward. It still needs a lot of resilience. It needs a lot of capital. It needs a lot of development finance to move it forward to where it should be in terms of us being ready for a greener economy and a more productive economy around renewable energy and production of energy. But having said that as well, I think that at the same time, I want to reiterate the point made earlier, is that within South Africa, we do have development finance. We have money. And I think that point about reforming the way in which access to international development finance has to be also accompanied around these mitigation strategies we talk about when it comes to climate financing strategies or climate financing instruments. At the same time, I think in terms of Africa and China, there is the shift in China around looking towards green finance rather, and looking towards renewable energy finance in Africa. So at the one end, there's this whole debate about China and the fossil fuel issue. On the other hand, if you're looking at the BRI, in certain pockets in Africa, there's this question about if China moves towards greener energy production and trying to source that energy and opening up that market for itself, what does this do for Africa, who still remains at the fossil fuel production level?
Chandra, what about in India? What are the unique challenges there when it comes to transitioning to carbon neutrality? And is there a viable roadmap in place?
I think there is a viable roadmap. For India, acting on climate will also mean resolving some chronic environmental issues, from water pollution to air pollution. India is also suffering from chronic air pollution in its cities. So I think climate change and the environmental issues are co-benefits for India. But the fact is that India is growing at a time when number of technologies are becoming much cheaper than the brown and black technology, the polluting technology that powered developed countries in 20th century. Today, solar is the cheapest source of electricity in India. In fact, coal is expensive. My estimation is in next few years, maybe very soon, renewable with battery will supply 24/7 electricity at a much cheaper rate than what coal does. However, having said that, India's energy system is 70% reliant on coal. So on one hand, while we need to do energy transition, on the other hand, we also have to do just transition, which means that how do we take care of large number of people who are working in coal sector? So we also have to develop a simultaneous roadmap on just transition so that these people are trained, they are given better job, the economy is made more diversified and resilient. So the debate on mitigation must also be paralleled by a debate on just transition for a country like India. And I think there is a sweet spot for India. And my guess is that even though I do not think India is going to announce anything big at the Biden summit, but before Glasgow, India will announce much ambitious target than what it has right now.
Michael, we're hearing a lot of very ambitious plans right now. The U.S. says it aims to cut its greenhouse gas emissions in half by 2030. China has pledged to become carbon neutral by 2060. The EU has announced a new target, which would be a 55% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. Is all of this achievable?
Absolutely. Indeed, not only is it achievable, much more is possible. We're in a world, again, where the cheapest way to generate energy is now renewable energy, renewable generation with wind, water, and sun. So that being the case, we can actually go beyond these government targets and be much more ambitious and much more fit for purpose and scale at getting us out of this unfolding crisis. I think the reality is that some of the challenges that the other two speakers have mentioned in terms of utilities standing in the way of the process and the build out of renewables in South Africa, that's actually mirrored in the United States. You have many utilities that are slow walking renewables and the build out of renewables. The just transition problem that we have there in India, we see that across the United States. But the fact is, in some places, take the state of Texas, for example, in the U.S., you've got more people working in the renewable sector already today, right now, than there are in oil and gas, and that's only going to continue to increase. So we can actually be much more ambitious than what the current president is calling for, and that's a good thing.
Sanusha, we don't have a whole lot of time left, but let me just ask you this. Let me ask you to expand a little bit on what Michael was saying. How can countries, from your perspective, better invest in renewables and provide energy access for the poor?
Well, I think they could definitely start doing a lot of the financing towards renewable energy in terms of helping individuals in particular communities, sectors, etc. I think the point about just transition and the fact that employment in the coal sector needs to transition to more renewable energy employment is one area. I think in South Africa, we are seeing people on the ground, communities, etc., engaging in their own forms of renewable energy, not necessarily only using the kind of coal production or the coal sources of energy, because they understand as well in terms of their own human experiences of what this means. But again, it's also important that we have the kind of right policy mix with the private sector also coming in and supporting that policy instrument with government, and of course engaging in terms of community-based initiatives, which we have to start thinking about, particularly in large urban sprawls that surround the periphery of urban centers in South Africa.
Chandra, we only have about a minute left, so let me just ask you quickly. One of the big concerns right now, of course, is deforestation. Is there anything that world leaders can do at this summit to pressure Brazil to do more to crack down on deforestation in the Amazon region?
Mohammed, I think we will have to look at deforestation, desertification, and agriculture together. There is a sweet spot there where both on all three triangles, if we work and we have a global mechanism. Right now, we have separate global mechanism for deforestation, for land, and for desertification. We need to bring all three of them together, put a lot of resources, because at the end of the day, deforestation is also about income and employment. And we have to provide alternative, which is much more better than what is there with deforestation. I just want to make last point, Mohammed, that
Chandra,
important for you.
Chandra, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
we are out of time, so we're going to have to end the conversation there.
Okay.
But thank you so much to you and to all of our guests, Michael Dorsey, Sanusha Naidu, and Chandra Bhushan. And thank you too for watching. You can see this and all of our previous programs again anytime by visiting our website, AlJazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.